On February 18th, 1516, the birth of child began at Placentia Palace in Greenwich. The winter air clung cold and heavy to the palace walls, as if even the stones themselves understood the importance of that morning. Inside the royal chambers, servants moved in hurried silence. Their footsteps echoed faintly across polished floors, their faces tense, their hands trembling with anticipation. Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, lay in labor. Pain came in waves, rising and falling like a storm that refused to pass. Her breathing was controlled, disciplined, shaped by years of strength and faith. She had endured this before. She had endured loss before. Outside the chamber, King Henry VIII paced relentlessly. He moved from one end of the room to the other, his boots striking the floor with sharp, restless rhythm. His hands pressed firmly against his knees, rubbing them as if he could force calm into his body through motion alone. He was waiting for a son, not simply a child. A son, a male heir who would secure the Tudor dynasty, a dynasty still young, still fragile, still vulnerable to collapse. Henry understood the brutal truth of power better than anyone. His father had taken the crown through war. Blood had secured their name. Blood would be required to preserve it. And without a male heir, everything could disappear. Catherine had already suffered greatly. Several pregnancies had ended in silence and grief. Children who never breathed. Children who never saw the light of the world. And the only boy born in 1511 had lived just 7 weeks before dying in his mother's arms. 7 weeks of hope. 7 weeks of victory. 7 weeks before everything was taken away again. Each loss had carved itself into Henry's soul. Not visibly, not openly, but deeply, because kings were not permitted a break. But they still felt fear, and Henry was afraid. Afraid that God had cursed him. Afraid that his dynasty would die with him. Afraid that history would forget his name. Inside the chamber, Catherine cried out again. The sound cut through the palace like a blade. Henry stopped pacing. For a moment, he held his breath. The world narrowed into silence. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Then the doors opened. The physicians and midwives emerged slowly. Their faces revealed everything before they spoke. There was no celebration, no relief, no triumph, only restraint, only caution, only truth waiting to be spoken. Henry's heart pounded in his chest. He searched their eyes. He searched their silence. And then they said it. A girl has been born. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. A girl, healthy, strong, crying loudly, filled with life and strength. But still, a girl. Henry did not react immediately. His face remained still, controlled, disciplined, because he was king. And kings did not reveal disappointment. Not in front of witnesses, not in front of servants, not in front of history, but inside him, something fragile collapsed. Not completely, not yet. He was still young, still powerful, still capable of producing a son. This was not the end. It cannot be the end. The child was named Mary. She was named in honor of Henry's younger sister, Mary Tudor, whose own royal marriage had strengthened alliances across Europe. It was a name of dignity, a name of legacy, a name that carried expectation. Mary Tudor, Princess of England. She was baptized with magnificent ceremony. Golden fabrics adorned the chapel. Candles burned with solemn intensity. Nobles gathered, their voices hushed with reverence. Priests spoke sacred words in Latin, words that bound her not only to the church, but to destiny itself. She was the king's only living child, and therefore, she was everything. And yet, not enough. Mary grew up surrounded by luxury. Her world was one of velvet and gold, of silk and ceremony. Her chambers were vast, their walls covered with tapestries depicting saints, angels, and biblical victories. Silver candlesticks stood upon polished tables, reflecting warm light across the room. Everything around her spoke of importance. Everything around her reminded her who she was. and what she represented. She was never alone. Governesses watched her constantly. Servants attended her every movement. Teachers shaped her mind with careful precision. Her education was not optional. It was essential, because she was not merely a child. She was the future. She learned Latin first, the language of scholars, the language of power, then French, then Spanish, the language of her mother. Words became her companions. She spoke them carefully, mastering their sounds, their meanings, their purpose. She learned music. Her fingers moved across the virginal with delicate precision, producing soft melodies that echoed through palace halls. Music gave her something words could not: peace. She learned dance, each movement controlled, each gesture elegant. She learned horseback riding. She learned discipline, control, obedience. She learned embroidery, threading silk into patterns of beauty and order. Each stitch required patience. Each stitch required stillness. These were not merely skills. They were preparation. Preparation for a life she did not yet understand. But above all else, she learned faith. Faith was not simply taught. It was lived. Her mother ensured it. Catherine of Aragon was deeply, unshakably Catholic. Her faith was not weakness. It was armor. She taught Mary about saints, about sacrifice, about suffering with dignity. She taught her that pain was not meaningless. Pain was purpose. Pain was purification. Together, they prayed. Together, they knelt before the altar. Mary remembered the chapel clearly. The scent of incense, the flicker of candlelight, the distant echo of choir voices. Those moments shaped her. They became part of her soul, because faith gave her something permanent, something the world could not take away. Or so she believed. Henry VIII loved his daughter, at least in the beginning. He admired her intelligence, her discipline, her grace. He saw in her the qualities of greatness. When she turned 6, he established her own royal household. Servants, advisors, attendants. She was treated as Princess of Wales in all but name, because she was his heir, his only heir. But it was not enough, because she was not a son. And as years passed, that truth became heavier, more dangerous, more unforgiving. Catherine aged. Time did what time always does, and no male heir came. Henry's patience began to decay. Slowly, quietly, but inevitably, he began to see Catherine differently. Not as partner, not as ally, but as failure. Mary did not understand this yet. She only saw that something was changing, something invisible, something she could feel but not name. And that change would destroy everything she had ever known. She learned quickly that survival required something far more painful than endurance. It required surrender. Not surrender of her faith, not surrender of her beliefs, those she guarded like embers hidden beneath ash, but surrender of her pride. The letters began to arrive, formal, cold, written in the language of power, not love. She was instructed to acknowledge her father as supreme head of the church. She was instructed to deny the authority of the Pope. She was instructed to accept that her parents' marriage had never been valid. She was instructed to accept that she herself had been born illegitimate. Each instruction was a knife carefully placed before her, waiting for her to pick it up and turn it against herself. At first, she refused. Quietly, stubbornly, completely. She was, after all, her mother's daughter. Catherine had endured isolation, humiliation, abandonment, and never once yielded her truth. Mary clung to that example like armor. But armor can become a prison. And Mary was alone. Her mother was gone. Her allies were gone. Even her household had been stripped away, replaced with servants loyal not to her, but to the crown's new order. She was watched constantly, observed, measured, reported on. Every word she spoke could be used against her. Every silence could be interpreted as defiance. She was no longer treated as a daughter of the king. She was treated as a problem to be solved. And Henry was growing older, less patient, more unpredictable, more dangerous. He had already proven he could destroy queens, destroy ministers, destroy friends, destroy anyone. Mary knew what he was capable of. She had seen it, and she understood something terrifying. He might destroy her too, not with a sword, not with a public execution, but with something slower. Erasure. She could be forgotten, left to rot in obscurity, her name reduced to a footnote, her existence reduced to a mistake. For a girl raised to believe she was destined for greatness, this was a kind of death. The pressure increased. Advisors came to her, not unkindly, but firmly. They spoke of practicality, of wisdom, of survival. They told her that submission did not mean belief, that words could be spoken without meaning them, that survival required flexibility. They told her she must bend, or she would break. Mary resisted for as long as she could, but resistance has limits, and loneliness has weight. She was no longer a child. She was a young woman in her 20s, isolated, vulnerable, and increasingly aware of her precarious position. Her father was still the most powerful man in England, and he was still her judge. Finally, after years of resistance, Mary made the decision that would haunt her forever. She signed the document acknowledging her father as head of the church. She signed the document denying the Pope's authority. She signed the document accepting her own illegitimacy. Her hand trembled as she wrote her name, not because she doubted her faith, but because she understood exactly what she was sacrificing. Not truth, not belief, but identity. She was signing away the person she had been raised to be. She was signing away her mother's legacy. She was signing away her own innocence. It was the price of survival. When the document was delivered to Henry, his reaction was swift. He forgave her, publicly, officially. She was welcomed back into his favor, not fully restored, not declared legitimate, but accepted, allowed to exist again within the fragile safety of his approval. For Mary, it was both relief and devastation. She had survived, but survival had changed her. She would never forget what had been done to her. She would never forget what she had been forced to do. She learned, in that moment, one of the most important lessons of her life. Power was not merciful. Power was not fair. Power demanded obedience, and power remembered everything. In the years that followed, Mary lived cautiously, carefully. She spoke little, observed much. Her father married again, and again, and again. Wives came and went. Some survived, some did not. Each new marriage brought uncertainty. Each new queen represented a shift in the fragile balance of the court. Mary learned to adapt, to remain quiet, to remain useful, to remain alive. She watched as her half-brother Edward grew, the long-awaited male heir, the child who had replaced her. He was fragile, intelligent, serious beyond his years. He was raised Protestant, molded carefully into the future Henry had envisioned. Mary watched him with complicated emotions. He was her brother, innocent, not responsible for the circumstances of his birth. And yet, his existence had destroyed her world. Still, she did not hate him. Not truly, because Mary understood something most people did not. Children were never the architects of their parents' sins. They were simply the ones forced to live with the consequences. When Henry VIII finally died in 1547, the entire kingdom held its breath. His death marked the end of an era defined by dominance, fear, and transformation. For Mary, it marked something more personal. The end of the man who had been both her father and her destroyer. She mourned him, not the king, but the father she had loved as a child. The father who had once held her hand. The father who had once called her his jewel. That man had been gone for many years, but his shadow had remained. Now, even the shadow was gone. Her brother Edward became king. He was only 9 years old, too young to rule, too young to understand the forces already moving around him. England was now firmly in Protestant hands, and Mary was once again an outsider. Edward's advisors saw her as a threat, not because of anything she had done, but because of what she represented. She was Catholic. She was Henry's daughter, and she had a claim. Claims were dangerous, especially when carried by someone who had survived as much as Mary had. They pressured her to abandon her faith. Again, they demanded conformity. Again, but Mary was no longer the frightened young woman who had signed away her identity to survive her father. She had endured too much, lost too much, sacrificed too much. She would not surrender again. Not this time. She continued to hear Mass in private, continued to practice her faith quietly, carefully, knowing she was being watched, knowing every act of defiance carried risk. Edward's government grew increasingly aggressive in its Protestant reforms. Churches were stripped of Catholic imagery. Rituals were abolished. Traditions erased. The old world Mary had been raised and was disappearing, and she was powerless to stop it. But she endured, because endurance was the only weapon she had ever truly possessed. Edward himself was not cruel. He was devout, sincere, convinced he was doing what was right. But sincerity does not soften consequences. Under his reign, England moved further and further from the faith Mary believed was the only path to salvation. She watched helplessly, waiting, surviving, because Mary understood something that few others did. Time changed everything. Kings died, governments fell, fortunes reversed, and those who survived long enough sometimes found themselves standing in places no one had imagined possible. She did not know when her moment would come. She did not know if it ever would. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would be ready. She had been forged in isolation, forged in humiliation, forged in abandonment, forged in survival. And survival had made her stronger than anyone realized. The world believed Mary Tudor was broken. They were wrong. She was waiting, and soon everything would change. But survival alone was never her final destiny. It was only the preparation. In the summer of 1553, whispers began to spread through England. Whispers of illness, whispers of weakness, whispers of a king who was dying. Edward VI had always been fragile. His body, though crowned with power, had never possessed the strength to match it. From childhood, his health had been carefully guarded, his routines controlled, his environment monitored. But no amount of caution could protect him from what was coming. At first, the court dismissed it as temporary. A fever, a cough, exhaustion. But the fever did not break. The cough worsened, and the king did not recover. Mary heard the rumors long before any official word reached her. She understood immediately what it meant. Not certainty, not victory, but possibility. And possibility was dangerous. Because if Edward died, the question of succession would rise like a storm. And Mary stood directly in its path. She was Henry VIII's eldest surviving child. By blood, by law, and by right, the crown should pass to her. But England was no longer the England of her childhood. It was now Protestant, its rulers Protestant, its power structure Protestant. And Mary was openly, unapologetically Catholic. To those who governed in Edward's name, her ascension represented not just a change of monarch, but a reversal of everything they had built. They could not allow it. And so, quietly, carefully, they began to prepare. Edward himself, young but deeply devout, had been raised to believe that Protestantism was the true faith. He had watched reforms reshape his kingdom. He had been taught that Catholicism was not merely wrong, but dangerous. He did not hate Mary, but he feared what her rule might mean. Under the guidance of his most powerful advisor, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, a plan began to take shape. A plan to bypass Mary entirely. A plan to erase her claim. A plan to replace her. There was another candidate. A girl, 17 years old, intelligent, educated, Protestant. Her name was Lady Jane Grey. She was Henry VIII's great-niece, and through a carefully constructed legal argument, Northumberland convinced Edward to name her his successor. Not Mary, not Elizabeth, Jane. It was a desperate gamble, one built on speed, secrecy, and control, because they understood something critical. If Mary had time, she could rally support. If Mary had time, she could remind the people who she was. If Mary had time, she could win. So they moved quickly. Edward died on July 6th, 1553, but his death was kept secret. For days, his body lay hidden while the machinery of succession was set in motion. Messages were sent, allies were contacted, plans finalized, and on July 10th, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen of England. a queen who had never sought the crown, a queen who did not even want it, a queen who understood, even in that moment, how fragile her position truly was. Meanwhile, Mary had already been warned. She did not wait. She did not hesitate. She fled immediately from her residence, riding hard across the countryside toward East Anglia. It was a calculated decision. East Anglia was known for its loyalty to her family. Its people remembered Catherine of Aragon. They remembered Mary as princess. They remembered who she truly was. And Mary understood something her enemies had underestimated. The crown did not belong only to those who declared it. It belonged to those who could claim it. She began to write letters, dozens of them, to nobles, to landowners, to officials, to anyone who might listen. She declared herself the rightful queen. She reminded them of her father. She reminded them of the law. She reminded them of loyalty. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. People answered. At first, only a few, then more, then dozens, then hundreds. Men brought weapons, brought horses, brought supplies. They did not come because Mary was powerful. They came because she was legitimate. Because in a world turned upside down by politics and religion, legitimacy still mattered. Mary established her base at Framlingham Castle. Its thick stone walls stood as silent witnesses to her transformation. She was no longer the isolated princess, no longer the discarded daughter, no longer the forgotten survivor. She was now a claimant. And every day, her army grew. Messengers arrived constantly, bringing news, bringing pledges, bringing hope. Even members of the Privy Council, those who had proclaimed Jane Queen, began to waver. Because power, Mary knew, was not fixed. It flowed, it shifted, it followed strength. And strength was gathering around her. In London, the situation grew increasingly unstable. Jane Grey, young and unprepared, found herself trapped inside a role she had never desired. She was queen in name, but not in reality. The people did not celebrate her. They did not rally to her. They watched, they waited, and they listened for news of Mary. Northumberland understood the danger. He gathered forces and marched out to confront her. It was his only chance. If he could capture Mary quickly, the crisis would end. If he failed, everything would collapse. But as he marched, his support began to crumble. Men deserted. Allies hesitated. Confidence evaporated. Because soldiers, like everyone else, understood risk. And many began to believe they had chosen the wrong side. Meanwhile, Mary remained calm, focused, patient. She did not rush forward blindly. She allowed time to work in her favor, allowed doubt to spread among her enemies, allowed loyalty to strengthen among her supporters. It was not just strategy, it was instinct, the instinct of someone who had spent her entire life navigating danger. Back in London, the Privy Council faced a terrifying realization. They had gambled, and they were losing. If Mary won, they would be traitors. If Mary won, they could lose everything. Titles, wealth, freedom, even their lives. Fear began to outweigh ambition, and fear changes everything. On July 19th, 1553, the Privy Council made their decision. They abandoned Jane. They abandoned Northumberland. They abandoned the plan, and they proclaimed Mary the rightful Queen of England. In the streets of London, people erupted into celebration. Church bells rang. Crowds gathered. Voices shouted her name, not in fear, but in triumph. Mary Tudor, the girl who had been declared illegitimate, the girl who had been abandoned, the girl who had been erased, was now queen. When the news reached her at Framlingham Castle, witnesses described her reaction as composed, controlled, dignified, but inside, she understood the magnitude of what had happened. She had survived everything, and survival had brought her here. Northumberland was arrested soon after. Jane Grey was imprisoned in the Tower of London. The crisis was over. Mary began her journey to London, no longer as a fugitive, but as a monarch. As she rode toward her capital, crowds gathered along the roads. They cheered, they knelt, they welcomed her. For many, she represented continuity, legitimacy, justice. For Mary, The moment was something far more personal. This was not simply victory. It was restoration, not of power, but of identity. Everything that had been taken from her was now returned. Her name, her status, her destiny. On September 30th, 1553, Mary Tudor was crowned Queen of England. She was 37 years old, no longer young, no longer naive. She had spent more than 2 decades enduring loss, humiliation, and fear. Now, at last, she held the one thing that had once seemed impossible: power. But power, she knew better than anyone, came with a price. Because survival had taught her something else. Victory did not erase the past. It only gave you the authority to answer it. And Mary intended to answer everything. Mary understood that claiming the crown was only the beginning. Keeping it would be far more difficult. She had inherited not just a throne, but a divided kingdom. For nearly 2 decades, England had been reshaped by Protestant reform. Churches had been stripped of Catholic imagery. Monasteries had been dissolved. Sacred traditions that had defined English spiritual life for centuries had been dismantled. Mary saw this not as progress. She saw it as destruction. To her, restoring Catholicism was not politics. It was justice. It was duty. It was salvation. And now, for the first time in her life, she had the power to act. From the very beginning of her reign, Mary I of England made her intentions clear. She would return England to the Catholic faith. Not gradually, not symbolically, completely. Parliament, cautious but obedient, began to reverse Protestant legislation. Catholic Mass was restored. Clergy who had married were removed. Protestant bishops were replaced with Catholic ones. At first, the transition was careful, measured. Mary did not want rebellion. She wanted unity. But unity required more than law. It required permanence. And permanence required something else: an heir. Mary was 37 years old. Every year mattered. Without a child, everything she restored could be undone after her death. The future of England's faith depended on her ability to produce a successor. And so, attention turned toward marriage. But this was not merely a personal decision. It was a political one. Her advisors presented options: English nobles, foreign princes, strategic alliances. But Mary's choice would define her reign. She chose Philip II of Spain. Philip was the son of the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He was Catholic, devout, powerful, and his marriage to Mary would align England with the greatest Catholic force in Europe. To Mary, it was the perfect union. To many English subjects, it was a nightmare. They feared foreign control. They feared Spanish influence. They feared becoming subjects not just of Mary, but of Spain. Fear turned into anger, and anger turned into rebellion. In early 1554, an uprising erupted. Led by Protestant nobles and fearful patriots, rebels marched toward London. Their goal was clear: stop the marriage, remove Mary, replace her. For the first time since claiming her crown, Mary faced the real possibility of losing it. But this time she did not flee. She did not hide. She stood her ground. At London's Guildhall, Mary addressed her people directly. Her voice was steady, her words deliberate. She reminded them that she was their rightful queen, that she had not abandoned them, that she would not abandon them now. Her courage changed everything. Support for the rebellion weakened. The uprising collapsed. Its leaders were captured. Among those imprisoned was a young woman who had once worn the crown herself. Lady Jane Grey. She had never truly been Mary's enemy. She had been a pawn, a symbol used by others. Mary did not want to execute her. She hesitated, but rebellion had changed the equation. As long as Jane lived, she remained a threat. Reluctantly, Mary signed the order. Jane Grey was executed within the walls of the Tower of London. Mary had spent years as a victim of political necessity. Now, she had become its instrument. In July 1554, Mary married Philip. The ceremony was grand, magnificent, historic. Mary believed it marked the beginning of England's Catholic future. And soon after, it seemed that future was secured. Mary became pregnant, or so everyone believed. Her body changed. Her Her abdomen swelled. She withdrew from public life in preparation for childbirth. The court waited. The kingdom waited. The future waited. But the child never came. Months passed, then more, and slowly, painfully, the truth emerged. There was no baby. It had been a phantom pregnancy, a cruel illusion. Mary was devastated, not just emotionally, politically. Without an heir, her life's work remained fragile, temporary, and time was running out. Meanwhile, her efforts to restore Catholicism intensified. Protestant leaders who refused to convert were arrested, tried, condemned, and executed. Many were burned at the stake. Publicly, painfully, unforgettably, the fires became symbols. Symbols of faith to some, symbols of terror to others. Nearly 300 Protestants were executed during her reign. Men, women, even the elderly. The smoke rose into the English sky, and with it, Mary's reputation began to transform. She was no longer simply queen. She became known by another name, Bloody Mary. It was not the name she would have chosen, but it was the name history would remember. Even as she enforced religious unity, England suffered other losses. In 1558, English forces lost control of Calais. It had been England's last territory on the European mainland. It had belonged to England for over 2 centuries. Its loss was devastating, a symbolic end to England's continental power. Mary was heartbroken. She reportedly said that when she died, the word Calais would be found engraved upon her heart. By then, her health was failing. She was weak, exhausted, worn down by years of stress, grief, and disappointment. And she knew something else. She knew she would not produce an heir. There was only one person left to succeed her, her half-sister, Elizabeth I of England. The same sister she had once distrusted. The same sister whose Protestant faith threatened everything Mary had fought to restore. But Mary had no choice. On November 17, 1558, Mary I of England died. She was 42 years old. Her life had been defined by struggle, by rejection, by survival, by power. She had risen from illegitimacy to sovereignty. She had faced abandonment, humiliation, rebellion, and betrayal. She had reclaimed her crown against impossible odds. And yet, in the end, the future she fought to secure would not belong to her. It would belong to Elizabeth. And under Elizabeth, England would once again become Protestant. Mary's restoration would be undone, her victories reversed, her vision erased. But her story did not disappear. Because Mary Tudor was never simply a villain. She was never simply a symbol. She was something far more human. A daughter who had been rejected. A believer who had never surrendered her faith. A queen who had fought her entire life to exist in a world determined to erase her. And in the end, she proved something history would never forget. Survival, even when it brings power, does not guarantee peace. But it does guarantee that your story will be told. But history rarely ends with death, because death does not silence consequences. It does not erase memory, and it does not prevent judgment. When Mary's body lay still, England did not pause. It moved forward, quickly, decisively, almost eagerly. Her half-sister, Elizabeth I of England, ascended the throne within hours. Where Mary had represented restoration, Elizabeth represented transformation. Where Mary had looked backward, Elizabeth would look forward. And almost immediately, the changes began. Elizabeth restored Protestantism, not with fire, not with executions on the same scale, but with permanence, carefully, strategically, irreversibly. The Catholic Mass was once again forbidden. Protestant prayer books returned. Clergy were required to swear loyalty not to Rome, but to the English crown. Mary's work, her sacrifices, her suffering, all dismantled. It happened so quickly that it seemed as if her reign had been only a pause, a momentary interruption in a larger current. But Mary had not ruled in vain, because even in failure, she had changed England forever. She had proven something no one could deny. A woman could claim the throne. A woman could hold it. A woman could defend it. Before Mary, The idea of a queen ruling England in her own right had been uncertain, uncomfortable, unproven. After Mary, it was reality. Elizabeth's success would be built upon that foundation, a foundation Mary had laid through pain, through resistance, through survival. Yet public memory did not reward her courage. It remembered her fires. It remembered the executions. It remembered the smoke. The name Bloody Mary endured. It passed from generation to generation. A warning, a symbol, a judgment. But names given by history are rarely complete, because history does not feel what its subjects felt. It does not experience their loneliness, their fear, their hope. Mary had spent her childhood adored, her youth rejected, her adulthood isolated, her reign contested, and her death followed by reversal. She had never truly belonged to the world around her. Not as a child, not as a princess, not even as a queen. Her life had been shaped by forces beyond her control long before she had the power to shape anything herself. Her father's obsession with son, his rejection of her mother, his rejection of her, the years of humiliation, the forced submission, the fear of execution. These wounds did not disappear when she became queen. They remained, invisible, but powerful. They shaped her decisions, her fears, her need for certainty, her need for faith, her need for control. Because Mary understood something deeply. Power could be taken away. Love could be taken away. Identity could be taken away. She had lost all three once before. She would never allow it again, even if the cost was everything else. Even if the cost was how she would be remembered. In her final months, Mary grew quieter, more withdrawn. The court that had once surrounded her with ceremony now surrounded her with silence. Her husband, Philip, was absent. He had returned to Spain. He had his own empire to govern, his own wars to fight. Mary remained in England, alone, as she had been so many times before. She knew her body was failing. She knew her time was ending, and she knew her sister would follow her. Elizabeth visited her near the end. The meeting was careful, respectful, but distant. They were sisters by blood, strangers by life. Mary did not try to change Elizabeth. She did not beg. She did not argue. She had spent her entire life fighting. At the end, she simply accepted what would come next. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to fight. When she died, she was buried in Westminster Abbey, the same sacred place where kings and queens of England had rested for centuries. Years later, Elizabeth would be buried beside her. In death, they would share what life had never allowed them to share peacefully. The same space, the same silence, the same permanence. And yet, their legacies would move in opposite directions. Elizabeth would become known as Elizabeth the Great. Mary would remain Bloody Mary, one remembered for unity, the other for division, one remembered for stability, the other for fear. But history, when examined closely, reveals something deeper. Mary had inherited a kingdom already broken, already divided, already transformed. She had not created the conflict. She had been born into it, born into a world where her existence had been questioned, where her legitimacy had been denied, where her survival had never been guaranteed. She had not ruled from comfort. She had ruled from memory, from trauma, from belief, from determination forged in isolation. She had believed she was saving England, saving its soul, saving its future, even if England did not want to be saved. Even if England would never thank her. Even if England would remember her only for its pain. Because Mary had never ruled to be loved. She had ruled to be right. And history, unlike people, does not forgive intention. It records outcome. But beneath the outcome, beneath the fires and the fear, beneath the crown and the condemnation, there remained something impossible to erase. Mary Tudor had survived everything meant to destroy her. She had outlived rejection, outlived disgrace, outlived illegitimacy, outlived those who had tried to replace her. And for 5 years, she had worn the crown that had once been denied to her. She had become queen, not by accident, not by gift, but by endurance. And endurance, even when misunderstood, is its own form of victory. Her story did not end as she had hoped, but it ended as she had lived. fighting until there was nothing left to fight, believing until there was nothing left to believe, and standing even when history would later try to reduce her to a single name. Bloody Mary, a name that hides the child she had been, the daughter she had been, the woman she had been, the queen she had fought to become. And behind that name remains the truth. She was not born powerful. She was not born secure. She was born unwanted. And she spent her entire life proving that unwanted did not mean unworthy. In the years that followed, stories about Mary began to change. Not immediately. At first, they were told by those who had opposed her, by those who had survived her reign, by those who had feared her authority. To them, she was not a child who had suffered, not a daughter who had been rejected, not a woman shaped by abandonment and loss. She was simply the queen who had burned their allies, the queen who had tried to stop what they believed was progress, the queen who had stood against the future they wanted. And so, her image hardened, simplified, reduced. It became easier to remember her as a villain than to remember her as human. Because humanity complicates judgment. Humanity forces empathy, and empathy softens certainty. But Mary had never seen herself as cruel. She had seen herself as necessary. She had grown up in a world where faith was not just belief. It was truth, absolute, unquestionable, eternal. To Mary, saving England from what she believed was spiritual destruction was not violence. It was duty. It was protection. It was love expressed through severity. A severity she herself had endured as a child. She had been forced to deny her mother, forced to deny her faith, forced to deny her identity. She had known what it meant to be broken by authority. And when she gained authority herself, she believed she was preventing a greater breaking. But power changes perspective. It replaces vulnerability with responsibility. It replaces fear with decision. And decisions made in fear of loss can become the very thing others fear most. Mary never stopped being the girl who had watched her world collapse. She never stopped being the daughter who had seen her mother cast aside. She never stopped being the princess who had been told she was nothing. Even as queen, those memories lived inside her. Quiet, persistent, guiding her. Because crowns do not erase pain. They only conceal it. And sometimes they magnify it. Mary's greatest tragedy was not simply that she ruled during a time of division. It was that she ruled while carrying wounds no crown could heal. She wanted stability. She wanted certainty. She wanted permanence. But permanence is something no ruler can truly create. Every decision she made was an attempt to secure a future she believed was fragile. A future she believed could disappear as easily as her childhood had. She had learned, early in life, that nothing was guaranteed. Not love, not status, not safety, not even identity. And so, she ruled with urgency, with intensity, with conviction that allowed no hesitation. Because hesitation, she believed, had once cost her everything. In her private moments, away from the court, away from the advisors, away from the expectations of her crown, Mary remained a solitary figure. She read letters. She prayed. She reflected. She searched for reassurance that her suffering had meaning, that her endurance had purpose, that her reign had mattered. But history does not answer those questions for those who live inside it. It answers only for those who come after. Mary never lived to see how history would interpret her. She never heard the stories that would be told about her, the warnings whispered, the legends repeated, the name that would outlive her. Bloody Mary, 2 words that carried fire, 2 words that carried fear, 2 words that carried judgment. And yet, behind those words lived a life far more fragile than the legend suggested. A life shaped by forces she had never chosen. A life defined by survival rather than certainty. A life spent fighting to hold on to what others had taken for granted. She had never been allowed to be ordinary. From the moment she was born, she had belonged to history, and history had demanded everything from her. Her childhood, her peace, her happiness, her legacy, even her memory. Because memory belongs not to those who live, but to those who remember. And those who remember often remember only what confirms what they already believe. But beneath the legend, beneath the name, beneath the fire and the fear, there remains something quieter, something easily overlooked. Mary Tudor was not born Bloody Mary. She was born Mary, a child, a daughter, a girl who loved her mother, a girl who trusted her father, a girl who believed her world was safe. She did not know that safety could vanish. She did not know that love could become conditional. She did not know that identity could be taken away. She learned those lessons slowly, painfully, irreversibly, and those lessons shaped the queen she would become. Not because she lacked compassion, but because she understood loss. Not because she lacked mercy, but because she feared chaos. Not because she lacked humanity, but because humanity had once been denied to her. Her story is not simply the story of a queen. It is the story of a child born into expectation, a child who became a symbol who became a ruler, and a ruler who became a legend shaped as much by fear as by truth. Even now, centuries later, her name still echoes, still provokes reaction, still divides opinion. Some see her as a tyrant. Others see her as a victim of circumstance. Others still see her as both. Because the truth of Mary Tudor cannot exist in simplicity. It exists in contradiction, strength and fragility, conviction and fear, power and loneliness, victory and tragedy. She achieved what had once seemed impossible. She became queen in her own right. She restored what she believed was sacred. She ruled a kingdom that had once rejected her. And yet, she never escaped the shadow of the girl she had once been. The girl who had waited for her father's approval. The girl who had watched her mother suffer. The girl who had learned that love could disappear without warning. That shadow followed her to the throne. It followed her through her reign. And it followed her into history. Because no crown can silence the past. It can only sit above it. And beneath Mary's crown lived a lifetime of memory. Memory that shaped her. Memory that drove her. Memory that defined her. Not Bloody Mary, just Mary, a girl who became queen and paid the price that history demanded. History would continue without her. It always does. New rulers rise. New conflicts emerge. New beliefs replace old ones. And the lives that once seemed so important slowly become stories. Stories told in quiet rooms. Stories written in heavy books. Stories remembered not for what was felt, but for what was done. Mary became one of those stories. But stories change depending on who tells them. To some, she was a warning. To others, she was a symbol of resistance. To others still, she was a tragic figure shaped by forces beyond her control. But to understand Mary, one must return to the beginning, to that winter morning in Greenwich, to the cold stone walls of Placentia Palace, to the anxious king waiting outside a chamber door, to the moment when expectation met reality, when hope met disappointment, when a child entered the world already burdened by destiny. She had not chosen her role. She had not chosen her struggle. She had not chosen the pain that would define her life. And yet, she endured it. That endurance became the quiet foundation of everything she would later become. Because endurance is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It exists in silence, in persistence, in survival. Mary survived humiliation. She survived rejection. She survived isolation. She survived political danger. She survived attempts to erase her entirely. And survival, in a world designed to break her, was itself an act of defiance. When she became queen, it was not simply a political victory. It was a personal one, a restoration of identity, a restoration of dignity, a restoration of existence. She had been told she was illegitimate. She had been told she was nothing. And yet, she wore the crown, not because she had been favored, but because she had endured longer than those who had opposed her. That endurance defined her more than any execution, more than any decree, more than any single decision. It defined the arc of her life, from unwanted child to ruling monarch, from discarded daughter to crowned queen, from forgotten princess to remembered ruler. Her reign was brief. 5 years. A small fragment in the long timeline of England's history. But within those 5 years lived the culmination of decades of suffering, patience, and determination. She did not rule carelessly. She ruled with urgency born from the knowledge that everything she had regained could be lost again, because she had lived through loss before. She knew how quickly the world could change. She knew how fragile power truly was. Even for a queen, especially for a queen, her greatest fear was not rebellion. It was erasure, to be forgotten, to be reduced to nothing, to have her existence denied once more. In the end, history did not erase her, but transformed her. It simplified her. It reshaped her into something easier to remember. Because complexity is difficult to preserve. Complexity demands attention. Complexity demands empathy. And empathy is not always granted by history. Yet Mary's life remains. In letters preserved across centuries. In records written by those who served her. In buildings that stood during her reign. In decisions whose consequences outlived her. She cannot be undone. She cannot be erased. She cannot be reduced entirely to legend. Because she was real. She lived. She suffered. She ruled. She died. And in doing so, she became part of something larger than herself. Not just the history of a nation, but the story of human endurance. The story of what it means to lose everything and still continue. To be denied and still believe. To be broken and still stand. Mary Tudor did not live an easy life. She did not live a peaceful life. She did not live a life free of regret. But she lived a life that mattered. A life that shaped the future of England in ways that cannot be undone. Even her failures shaped what came next. Even her defeats created new realities. Because history is not built only by those who succeed. It is built by those who struggle, those who resist, those who endure long enough to leave a mark. Mary left her mark, not in monuments, not in victories, but in survival. And survival, in the end, is the most human legacy of all. She began life as a disappointment. She ended life as a queen. Between those two moments lived a story of pain, faith, power, and endurance that continues to echo across centuries. A story that reminds us that history is not made by perfect people. It is made by human beings. Fragile, flawed, determined, and unforgettable. Mary was all of those things, and that is why she is still remembered. What Mary never fully understood, even at the very end, was how deeply her childhood had shaped everything she became. The loneliness, the rejection, the endless need to prove that she was worthy of love. These wounds did not disappear when she became queen. They simply changed form. Because crowns do not heal wounds. They conceal them. Behind ceremony, behind authority, behind obedience enforced by fear and loyalty. But inside, the same child still existed. The child who had once stood at a window, watching riders disappear into the distance, wondering if her mother would ever return. The child who had once waited for her father's approval and found only silence. The child who had once believed that faith would protect her from suffering. That child never truly left her. It remained, quietly guiding her decisions, influencing her fears, strengthening her resolve, and shaping her need to restore what she believed had been unjustly taken. Her devotion to Catholicism was not only theological, it was personal. It was the last unbroken bond she shared with her mother. The last piece of a world that had been destroyed. To abandon it would have meant abandoning Catherine, abandoning the memory of the only person who had loved her without condition. So she held on to it with absolute determination, even when it cost her the affection of her people, even when it cost her peace, even when it cost her legacy. Because to Mary, faith was not politics. It was identity. It was survival. It was love preserved in belief. Her marriage to Philip had been another attempt to secure stability, to create continuity, to ensure that the suffering she had endured would not repeat itself through civil war or uncertainty. She had hoped, perhaps secretly, that love might grow. That companionship might soften the loneliness she had carried her entire life. But Philip remained distant, respectful, polite, absent. He fulfilled his duties as consort, but he did not share her emotional world. He did not understand the depth of her past. He did not carry her memories. He did not share her grief. And so she remained alone, even as queen, even as wife, even surrounded by court and ceremony. Because loneliness does not disappear in crowds. It survives in silence, in private moments, in thoughts left unspoken. As her health declined, those private moments became more frequent. She spent longer hours in prayer, longer hours in reflection, longer hours confronting the reality that her time was limited. She was only in her early 40s, but her body had endured decades of strain, emotional strain, physical strain, spiritual strain. Her strength had never been infinite. It had simply been sustained by necessity. Now necessity was fading, and exhaustion was taking its place. She knew what would come after her. Elizabeth, her half-sister, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the daughter of the woman whose existence had destroyed her childhood, the daughter of the woman whose rise had marked Mary's fall. It was a cruel symmetry, and yet Mary did not resist it. She did not attempt to prevent Elizabeth's succession, because she understood something that had taken her entire life to learn. The future cannot be controlled. It can only be faced. She had fought her battles. She had reclaimed her crown. She had restored her faith, if only temporarily. She had proven her existence could not be erased. That was enough, more than enough. On November 17th, 1558, Mary Tudor died. Quietly, without spectacle, without triumph. She left the world much as she had entered it, surrounded by uncertainty, surrounded by expectation, surrounded by forces larger than herself. Elizabeth became queen that same day, and England began another transformation, another chapter, another story. Mary's policies would be reversed. Her religious restoration would be undone. Her efforts would slowly dissolve beneath the passage of time. But her existence could not be undone, because she had lived, she had ruled, she had endured. History would remember Elizabeth as glorious. History would remember Mary as controversial. But history would remember them both. Two sisters, two queens, two survivors of the same broken family, each shaped by the same king, each shaped by the same past, each forced to navigate a world that did not expect women to rule. Mary had ruled first. She had walked into uncertainty so that others could follow. She had borne the weight of doubt, the weight of resistance, the weight of expectation, and she had not collapsed beneath it. That alone ensured her place in history, not as a symbol of perfection, but as a symbol of endurance. The frightened child had become the most powerful woman in England. The rejected daughter had become sovereign. The forgotten princess had become queen. And though time would soften her image, those stories would reshape her memory. Though her name would carry both condemnation and sympathy, she would never disappear, because history remembers those who endure. And Mary Tudor endured. In the years that followed her death, people spoke of Mary in hushed tones. Some spoke with resentment, others with sorrow, others still with confusion, unsure how to judge a life so filled with contradiction. Time began its slow work, reshaping memory. The fires that had once burned so brightly were extinguished. The voices that had once condemned her fell silent. The urgency of her reign faded into distance. And yet, her presence remained, not in the fear she had inspired, but in the path she had carved. Because before Mary, England had never truly accepted the authority of a woman ruling alone. Her reign forced the kingdom to confront something it had long resisted: the reality that power did not belong exclusively to men. That a woman, even one rejected and humiliated, could rise, could rule, and could shape the destiny of a nation. She had proven that legitimacy did not come from birth alone. It came from endurance. It came from survival. It came from the refusal to disappear. Elizabeth would go on to rule longer, to rule more successfully, to rule more gloriously. But she ruled in a world that Mary had already changed. A world where the idea of a female sovereign was no longer unthinkable. Mary had faced the uncertainty first. She had carried the burden first. She had stood alone first. That was her quiet victory, not written in celebration, but written in possibility. There's a tendency in history to divide people into simple categories: heroes and villains, successes and failures. But real lives do not fit so easily into such narrow definitions. Mary was not simply the queen who burned her enemies. She was also the daughter who loved her mother, the child who lost everything, the woman who spent her life searching for security in a world that had denied it to her. She was shaped by loss long before she ever held power, shaped by abandonment, shaped by fear, shaped by faith. And when power finally came, it did not transform her into someone new. It revealed who she had always been, someone who believed deeply, someone who endured silently, someone who refused to surrender her identity, even when surrender would have brought peace. Her story is not comfortable. It is not simple. It does not offer easy answers, but it offers something more valuable: understanding. Understanding that history is not made by symbols. It is made by people. People who feel. People who suffer. People who hope. People who endure. Mary Tudor was one of those people. She entered the world as a disappointment. She left it as a queen. Between those two moments stretched a life defined not by perfection, but by persistence. A life marked by pain, faith, isolation, and strength. A life that continues to echo, not because it was flawless, but because it was human. And in the silent halls where she once walked, in the stone walls that once witnessed her tears, in the crown that once rested upon her head, her story still remains. Not as a warning, not as a legend, but as a reminder that even those the world tries to erase can endure long enough to become unforgettable.